So, Don, director of Big Hero 6, why don't you tell us a bit about the film?
Well, Big Hero 6 is actually based on a Marvel comic of the same name. However, we've kind of crafted an original story that's kind of inspired by the comic. The story centers on a 14-year-old super genius named Hiro Hamada who suffers the loss of his older brother and best friend, Tadashi. And Tadashi's robot, a healthcare robot named Baymax, becomes sort of his surrogate big brother and healer, essentially. And not only that, but Hiro turns to his brother's best friends, some college geniuses, to form a superhero team.
Now, Baymax joins a long line of movie robots. Was there any direct references to any previous incarnations that we've seen?
There is actually the opposite of that. Very early on, I grabbed images of pretty much every robot that existed in movies, right? And I sat there with John Lasseter, and we looked at him, and we all decided, okay, we got to do something different. So I did a research trip to MIT, Harvard, and Carnegie Mellon, and I was on the hunt for something unique. And not only that, but I was on the hunt for, we had a term at the studio, we wanted a huggable robot. And so it was at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh that I found a researcher doing research in soft robotics, which is a very real field. It's brand new, and essentially these researchers are going to be crafting healthcare robots out of vinyl that are inflatable, and they'll be used in the healthcare industry. So the minute I saw that technology, it was like nothing I'd ever seen before. And the entire character of Baymax, his persona, his personality, and his physical design came from that research trip.
So what was the look of Baymax before you came on board then, in terms of the comics? How did he look and how did he feel?
Well, he kind of took on different forms in the comics. He at one point, he was sort of almost a dragon. You know, he kind of looked like a sort of a synthezoid dragon character. And then he also took on the form of sort of your more traditional Japanese mech robots. So I was very thrilled when I found the soft robotics because I knew it would allow us to put a robot on screen you've never seen before.
Now, you mentioned it's a Marvel property as well as a Disney one. How closely is that relationship in terms of making a film?
We're actually very close. They essentially became, our good friends, and a couple of their creative committee members, Joe Quesada and Jeff Loeb, became essentially members of our Story Trust. And a Story Trust is all the directors and who look at the films and give feedback on the film. So every time we screen the movie, and we screened it probably 8 times over the course of this movie's life, they came and they gave us notes and feedback, and so they were really supportive throughout.
Is it the same sort of process they employ over at Marvel, or is it very different in terms of the way they make films?
Well, they don't necessarily do animated films, so they're more used to sort of the live action side of things, and our process is a 3.5-year, sometimes 4-year process. So it's compared to live action filmmaking, it's a little more luxurious as far as the time goes, and we storyboard the films repeatedly. When I talked about the screenings, that's what we do. We storyboard versions of the film and watch them with the crew and the Story Trust, and that's what the Joe Quesada and Jeff Loeb came and reviewed.
So of the various versions that you screened, have there been any big changes that have happened, and what were the reasons behind that?
Well, it's always story, and the changes always have to come from the emotional story. And the emotional story of this film really was the hero Baymax story, the idea that hero suffers a loss, and the Baymax is trying to heal him. And at first he doesn't know how to do that because he's used to physical ailments. This is an emotional ailment, and so Baymax has to go through a little education. So that was the emotional story. So any time we changed a scene or sequence, it was because it wasn't servicing that story. And there were a couple sequences in the film that, in fact, the introduction of Baymax we changed because essentially the first version of it, Tadashi was presenting Baymax at the science fair, and Fred was actually Baymax's patient. And it was a very funny scene. But our main character was a spectator in that scene, and it wasn't servicing that emotional story. So we, pretty late in the game actually, we changed it to the version that's in the film now.
Excellent. And we talked about the look and feel of Baymax.
Mm-hmm.
How about getting the look of the human characters? How did you go about doing that? And is it closely based on the voice actors that came in?
Well, essentially the characters were mostly designed prior to the voice actors that came in. And we have wonderful character designers at Disney, Shiun Kim and Jin Kim, who are just some of the best in the business. And we talked about very early on about what I was thinking as far as who the characters were, and had some thoughts, and maybe even done some preliminary sketches myself. But really, it was Shiyun and then Jin, who followed him up, that designed the characters. And we just, we're always going for appeal. That's a big thing with Disney animation. We want our characters to be very appealing, and for you to just smile when you see them, and also so that they look very distinctive. And for this film, it was very interesting, the fact that we had such a young cast. Our protagonist, our main character, is 14, and then everybody else is essentially in their early 20s. They're all college students. So it was a real interesting opportunity for us to put new characters on screen, because essentially they're very modern characters as well. This is a slightly futuristic movie. So a lot of Disney films kind of take place in the romantic past somewhere, but this one was actually kind of slightly futuristic. So it was really fun for us to kind of look at clothing design and that type of thing and let it reflect right now.
Sure, and you say it's slightly futuristic. It's also a slightly futuristic location, or an alternate location.
Alternate universe, yeah.
Yeah. Now, how did you go about creating that and getting the look right for that?
Well, essentially research. It's such a big part of what we do. We did various research trips to Tokyo. I spent about 13 days there. And again, just soaking up, taking pictures and going to restaurants and talking to people, talking to experts, and really just immersing ourselves in the culture. And we did the same thing with San Francisco. So, and we do all of that before we ever really do much artwork, because we really feel like we have to, really take in as much information as we can so that we can be experts on the various worlds that we're creating.
The film's already been hugely successful over in the States and internationally. That obviously brings up the question of a sequel or possible ideas further on down the line. Have you thought about that yet, and is there anything in the works?
We have not thought about that yet, and nothing is in the works. And essentially, we put everything we had into this film. I mean, it was a massive undertaking. It was a very complex movie to make, and so we really put everything we had into it. And we have not had any discussions. We're gonna, as soon as the movie's done rolling out, we're going to take some very long vacations, and then we'll come back together and we'll see what happens.
So what about in terms of for you next then? Would you look to carry on this story, or would you look to do something totally different and then come back?
Again, it's hard to answer that, because I've been trying very hard to just focus on rolling this film out, and I'm going to take probably a couple months off if possible, and get to know my family again, and try really hard not to think about what happens next until that 2 months is over.
And what has been the reaction from your family then towards the film?
Oh, they loved it. It was so rewarding. I have two sons, 10 and 7, who came to the premiere. And essentially, they hadn't really seen much before that. They'd seen the toys, because the toys had come out, but they hadn't seen the movie. And they were cheering at the end. They just loved it. So it was right in their wheelhouse.
Excellent. I had the same reaction from my nephew when I took him to see it. So that's the perfect reaction.
It's a great feeling.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Hey You Guys!
Hey You Guys, huh?
Hey, you guys.
Is that from the Goonies?
It is indeed, yes.
Nice.